الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, this evening we'll touch on some of the issues that were raised by President Trump. I will start with the international related issues, and Haji Hassan will talk about the domestic. Now, someone may say some of them are related, like US aid and the CIA ordinance and the others, and indeed they are. But I'll try to cover the international aspect, and he will, inshallah, cover the domestic implication. So we'll start with the statements so far, and the actions have touched few countries around the world. Touched China, touched Canada, Mexico, Panama, Gaza, of course, Iran, and it's only 2 weeks. I mean, he has been only there for 2 weeks, and we have to live for 4 years with this chaos that is becoming like, a zoo. So he started with this issue of Panama. And for those who do not know, there's this Panama Canal that the US built in the old days, connect the Caribbean with the Pacific Ocean, used by American and others, ship is just a shortcut. He started by saying he want to occupy Panama, that China have taken over the canal. They charge the Americans too much for the transportation through the canal, and this canal was built by the US, so we're gonna assume control of it, and so on and so forth. And of course, what happened after that really was big embarrassment. So Rubio went to Panama to negotiate and talk, and he want to prove himself as, tough Secretary of State. So he came back and said, we agreed with Panama that they will not charge us any money for American ships. There's a tweet on this. And within, moments, the government of Panama said, absolutely did not happen. Absolutely did not happen. We did not even agree on anything. With this embarrassment, Rubio came back and issued the State Department, another tweet saying, this issue was not discussed. So that was a very, very big embarrassment for the country in this regard. It turns out also that China is not controlling the canal. They have investment in the harbors around it. But Panama came out and said that they will put an end to the China's relationship with Panama in terms of those investments that they have made. And the second and third was Mexico and Canada. He came out with tariffs, saying that basically Canada should be the 51st state of the America. And of course, the Canadians said no thanks in this regard. What we need to understand about Trump is what the Europeans talk about him. Don't take him literally, but take him seriously. Don't take him literally, but take him seriously. What does that mean? So when he said that we're going to impose tariffs on Canada, take it serious. But when he said that I will erase the tariffs if Canada becomes the 51st state, that's utter nonsense. You cannot just take it. He just, throwing those words in there. And he keep every day bringing something, sometimes shocking, sometimes outrageous, sometimes surprising, sometimes illogical, sometimes insane. all those ideas, sometimes small, sometimes big. At one point, he wanna rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. So the president of Mexico said, why don't we call Arizona and Texas and California, all those states that they took, US took from Mexico, to call them Mexicana Americana or Americana Mexicana in this regard. So taking it basically as some kind of a joke in this regard. So he imposed sanctions on Canada and Mexico, and then they talked to him, and then suddenly he said, we're gonna suspend it for 30 days. He said, oh, Canada have given concession, Mexico has given concession. Well, the Mexican government said, well, the US has given concession. They promised that they will control the flow of arms from the US to the cartel, the drug cartel in Mexico. Because more arms go from the US to Mexico than from Mexico to the US. I mean, the biggest idea that was really insane, outrageous, illogical, is when he stood with Netanyahu. And he was surrounded on the right by Netanyahu, on the left by the chief of staff of the White House. This lady was looking at him. I mean, you can see that as if she's sending, arrows. What are you talking about? And I'm not really sure if he discussed this previously with Netanyahu. So basically, he started throwing some words. We're gonna own Gaza. We're gonna rebuild Gaza. The US will own Gaza. The people of Gaza will need to leave Gaza for good. They will not come back. And along these lines, he really emphasized something indirectly, saying basically Netanyahu is a criminal. He talked about the suffering of the people of Gaza and the bombing, and those people have suffered a lot. And he's talking next to the criminal who have done it. I mean, Netanyahu is standing and, in this regard and saying, those people went through this and through this and through this. Who's the criminal? I mean, he's sitting there. But when he talked about the US owning Gaza, you could look at Netanyahu, go back to the video, he looks like the chicken that is about to lay an egg, if you know what I mean. At one point, you look at him, he's gonna break into laughing. At another point, he will cry. Of course, he's coward, he cannot challenge Trump, but the people on the right have also talked. They said, oh, by the way, the Bible said this land is for Jews, not for Americans. Of course, Netanyahu cannot stand and says, this land is for us, not for you in this regard. All what he had to say is, oh, this is a creative idea and we should be looked at and this and this and that. From my perspective, it's an absolute nonsense. And it's done in a way consistent with the past 2 weeks. Keep the whole world on its toes and go from one subject to the other. So basically, I mean, even one subject would take the media and the world to interact and respond to it, a few days. But in one day, he keep bringing, and Dr. Hassan will talk about domestic, and you will see even, it's another level of craziness in this regard, that by keep doing this, people will be just running after him without breath, trying to catch up on the issues in this regard. He finished his statement, and then his team, just directly after he finished his statement, said, oh no, the people of Gaza will be given the choice to leave. So it's no longer they have to leave. Then his team said, no, it's not owning, because we are not going to put any money. And they said, well, don't take this yani, in the way it is, because we are not going to put any troops. You know, all of these are walking back. This is on the same day after he made those statements, which just tells you that neither Netanyahu nor the White House were prepared for what he will say. Now, if you listen to him today, let me just tell you, quote what he said today. He said the following today. President Trump said he had studied the issue very closely over a lot of months from every angle. Liar, liar, liar. I mean, only 13% of the American people approve of his plan. This is the statistics today. A poll was done. It's on Fox News, which is pro-Trump. It says only 13% of the American people agree with the Gaza plan. In general, they said 53% support so far his work favorably, and the rest, of course, do not approve. But you can see the exact lies, because neither his visitor Netanyahu nor his team were prepared for what he was saying or he will say. So from this perspective, I think this is just something that he thought that he will throw this ball and see where it's gonna roll. That could be one interpretation. Another is that he's planning something for the West Bank, of allowing the Zionists to annex part of the West Bank. And he's throwing this as something that is shocking, that the whole area against it, Europe is against it, the whole world is against it, and then he will come and say, okay, we can work something out in this regard, but let's deal with West Bank. Why? Because he made an announcement saying Israel is a small piece of land. What does that mean? I mean, he's saying we need to own Gaza. America needs to own Gaza. So then the only thing that was left is the West Bank. So that may be something that is coming. There are some indication. One of them, he said, within 4 weeks, we'll have an announcement about the West Bank. Huckabee, who is his ambassador in Tel Aviv, or now I guess in Jerusalem with the embassy in Jerusalem, said that we are preparing something of, on biblical level, yesterday or today. So it could be this thing of buying, and there's nothing about buying. They are not, he said clearly, we are not going to put any money in Gaza. We are not going to put any troops in Gaza. He said that, after the second stage of this, the Israelis will hand us Gaza. And of course, you have seen the reaction, not just from the Muslim world and, from the international, arena, from the UN, from many countries in this regard, that this is basically ethnic cleansing. I mean, he's saying there are 2.5 million, move them into nice areas. Well, he should visit the camps in Jordan for the Palestinians that were established in 1948. Some of you might have been to those camps. It's miserable condition, especially in the winter. They put Palestinians in camps in Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, saying basically, you are here temporarily for a few weeks, few months, till we sort things out, and then you're going to go back to Palestine. It has been 75 years. So I'm not sure where are those nice areas in the Sinai Desert or in Jordan Desert or in the Saudi Desert or what have you in this regard. So again, I really think the whole world reaction to this was overblown. The Arab reaction, same thing in this regard, that this thing was, instead of them really emphasizing on some real issues, they talk about things that are not really practical and will not be done. Um, Trump will be here for 4 years. This is not a US policy. There are US policies regarding many places in the world. This is not a US policy that we're going to own Gaza. They have tried 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq and spent trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of deaths of Iraqis and Afghanis and thousands upon thousands of Americans killed, and more than 500,000 came here insane because of what they have done, their hands have done in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he is of the philosophy that I want to end the wars. I mean, getting into Gaza, as he put it, that he want to make Gaza the Riviera of the Middle East. And just another section of France, that he want to build hotels and he want to build restaurants and he want to build this and build that, and having a Trump Tower here and a Trump Tower there and a Trump Tower in the middle. I mean, he's talking as a businessman, not as a political leader, not as a US president. And in fact, this whole plan was presented back by a professor of economics as an economic plan for Gaza, of how to really, because some of you have been seeing, for example, Myrtle Beach or beaches in Florida or Virginia Beach. Basically, Gaza have a section on the Mediterranean. So they want to use this as a place where the rich people come and spend time, and they want people from all over to come, meaning it's open for all in this regard. Today, Netanyahu had this interview. It could have been done, yesterday or the day before, but it was, at least I saw it on part of the statements that were on the Fox News, basically saying, people of Gaza will leave and then they can come back. But this contradicts what Trump is saying. Now Netanyahu is saying, they can come back, but we need to be sure they are not terrorists. So there will be some kind of a test in this regard. Another point of view on this is that seeing more than 500,000 people of Gaza going gladly, very happy, from the south to the north, and the Ummah have seen that despite the fact that the Zionists have said this will never happen, we will never allow them to go back to the north, we will never leave Netzarim, which divide Gaza between the north and the south, we will never do this, and they have done all of them, including today leaving Netzarim. I mean, that was a big loss for the Zionists. Netzarim, the area that separates the north from the south, the Israelis said, we are here, we're going to stay here, we are not going to leave. And this is very vital for security and all this. Part of also the second stage is that they're going to leave Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Egypt and Israel. So I think seeing these things and seeing the joyful environment in Gaza, with Hamas putting a stage and showing some theoretical show for the hostages being released in this regard, there's no doubt it just get the Israelis crazy. So all of this could really be also to mess up this part and leave uncertainty within the people of Gaza and within the area. Initially, he emphasized that we need to remove them to Egypt and Jordan, and then they start talking about Malaysia and Indonesia and Albania and so on and so forth. And as I said, I don't think this is going anywhere in this regard. Some other stuff is that he want to buy Greenland, and of course they said no thanks. And in the front of Netanyahu, he shocked Netanyahu because Netanyahu was coming to change the Middle East. Basically, he want to attack Iran and the US will be with him. So he was shocked that Trump said, you know, I think I can meet with the president of Iran and deal with him. That was shocking to Netanyahu because, you know, just like in the old days, what he did with the president of North Korea. He suddenly went to North Korea and met twice with the president of North Korea. I mean, imagine this, the president of the most powerful country in the world meet with somebody they have been taken as a rogue nation, as somebody who's crazy, as somebody this, and that, and then he go and meet with him. So the fact that he suggests, and of course Netanyahu cannot really come and say, don't do it in public, but actually it took them by, the Israelis by surprise. That instead of him saying, you know, yes, we need to do this with Iran, he said, I'm going to apply maximum pressure, but I think I'm going to meet with the president of Iran and work something out. This is not something that the Israelis will be happy with. The other thing that is also another one of his is South Africa. Many of you know that South Africa have taken the Israelis to the International Court. So he comes with this hilarious thing that the South Africa government, which is the majority black government, is really not treating the white minority as it should be, and they are taking their lands without accountability. And he is starting a process supported by the US to relocate the whites of South Africa. He want to relocate the whites of the South Africa. And the South Africa president said, you know, the whites in South Africa are among the richest and the most privileged. And who told you anyway that they want to leave the country? But again, this is one of his, you know, hitting left and right. And basically he want to suspend the assistance to South Africa, which is like $400 million in this regard. And that would not shake or break that country. There was this thing about the CIA. And as you know, the Muslims and the non-Muslims around the world suffered from the CIA, from their assassination of leaders, and from their poisoning of leaders, from their coups in the Middle East and Syria and Egypt and messing up big time. So he ended up sending this letter to the CIA saying basically, asking them to quit, which I think we support, you know, all of us, alhamdulillah, we support that initiative. But it's crazy. I mean, you know, Hassan will talk more about, you know, the domestic, but, you know, people are saying, you are dismantling the government. I mean, if you are to come and say, CIA, you know, quit, maybe if you do not, we will fire you. He will talk about the 2 million that also he sent the government workers. But who is the beneficial person who will benefit? It's Putin. It's Putin. I mean, the CIA have been helping Ukraine with intelligence, with support, and all this against Russia. If you shake the CIA, you are really doing favor only to Putin and company. And the last item, inshallah, so that we'll split the time between the domestic and international, is the US aid. It has two parts, just like the CIA. Brother Hassan will talk about the domestic. But the international President Kennedy in the 60s have established this American institution. It's called USAID. This institution has a budget of tens of billions of dollars. I saw a figure of 40 billion recently in this regard. So they came one day and they said basically 10,000 employees of USAID are laid off around the world, of course. In many countries, every country that they have, from Egypt to Palestine to Pakistan to Jordan, USAID is all over the place. I mean, this is the soft power that the US have used traditionally to keep influence, spread the American culture, recruit agents. So they employ people. Eventually, some of them become, agents, and it's a tool for the CIA to work in many countries that restrict their work. They put their nose in everything. In Egypt, for example, from the taxes to the birth control to whatever comes to your mind, the curriculum. I mean, imagine they spend $8 million in a South American country to train journalists on using non-binary labels for humans. People usually say he or she, a man or woman. So they spent $8 million. Of course, it's a US company that got this, training them to say, it's not just he and she. When you talk about, you said pregnant people, not a pregnant woman, because you're not to offend some of those who change their gender. $8 million just to train, and so much money. By the way, one of the, congressman, no, it was a senator who came with all those lists that must came from investigating the USAID. In many countries, they spend tens of millions of dollars on the people who follow the track and the style of life of Qawm Lut. So much money is being spent around the world. So much money on this. Another chunk of money is spent on spreading diversity, equality, and inclusion, which he have hit, and Hassan will talk about it, around the world. This is the Biden administration in this regard. So you can see that, yeah, indeed, if I am, concerned as a citizen about spending money overseas, definitely $40 billion are going where? What they do not realize is it's those people, so-called, I do not really use the musical term LG, whatever. They are people who follow Qawm Lut, no more, no less in this regard. They are American agents. That's where you get American agents in Russia and other places. Those who choose different lifestyle, they go spend money on them and adopt them and become agents. So it's not that USAID is just giving free money, but it would affect the life of many people overseas. I mean, I know in Palestine, if you go to Palestine, you will see all those nice cars in Palestine says USAID, and locals who have been employed by the USAID and being, paid big money. So definitely, compared, of course, with the salary of the locals. So definitely, this would leave a big impact around the world, and it's already, sending shockwaves through the world, and many people are calling for him to reconsider in this regard. Inshallah, for the sake of time, we'll go back to Haji Hassan, and if we have some time later on, we can discuss questions, answer, or comments.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. So, some of these are overlapping topics, so sometimes we'll be talking about the same thing, but it impacts domestically and internationally. So, for example, I wanted to start off with tariffs. So we know that the Mexican and the Canadian tariffs were canceled, but the Chinese tariffs were not canceled. That's 10% tariff on China. And one of the things that's interesting is that as soon as that the companies here became aware that there's going to be tariffs, they started importing large amounts from overseas. So in fact, you think a tariff will reduce your trade deficit. It increased the US trade deficit by 4% in December. In fact, and also the Chinese, are smart. They did analysis. They've been preparing for this for a long time. They did analysis carefully of where they can hit back so it will affect his supporters the most. I mean, think about this. This is what the Chinese have: granular detail. I mean, they have TikTok. They've been collecting all your data. So, so they know. So not only tariffs, but also restriction of certain materials, like antimony and other things which are critical to high-tech electronics. One of the best drone makers the U.S. has, they couldn't make drones because the batteries require this material that's in China. So the Chinese already responded. They're putting tariffs on coal, natural gas, petroleum, and a bunch of different manufactured products which are manufactured in certain areas. North Dakota, for example, very heavily hit by some of these issues. So, I think we heard the tariffs were removed, but we maybe didn't pay attention. The Chinese tariffs were not withdrawn, and that is going to have a big impact going forward in terms of negotiations, because I think what they were saying is that Trump may have expected the Chinese to suddenly negotiate like Canada and Mexico, and they didn't do it. They said, do what you want. Instead, they hit back in a very targeted way, and we'll see if his own supporters will pull back on these tariffs or not. So that's one thing on the trade deficit and tariffs, because it does impact domestic different issues as well. Resignations, we talked about that the Trump administration had basically told his leaders to offer a voluntary resignation to the entire US government workforce. We thought it was just the domestic workforce, which is, I think we said like 2 million. And basically they offered them to don't do any work till September, just stay home. They said, and they put it very explicitly in the letter, you don't have to do anything. No, literally nothing. Just go home, and we definitely won't hold it against you, and you don't just keep staying home until September, and then we'll take you off of the rolls in September.
We will pay you.
Well, yeah, they'll pay you, stay home, don't do anything. That was crazy enough. Only 40,000 people so far accepted it, so it wasn't a very low percentage of people who actually accepted the offer. But then we learned, as Brother Shem was mentioning, that they had not only did this for the whole government, but they also did it for the CIA, the NSA, and the Office of Director of National Intelligence. They gave them the same offer. In fact, there was a question about who did they offer it to, and it was clarified this was offered to any employee at these agencies. So, it wasn't just targeted to one or two. It was a crazy thing to do. These are literally your front lines of defense, and it's like you tell the army, you say, all of you want to quit, go ahead. These are members of your security establishment. It's one of the craziest things to do. And they didn't mention how many people have accepted, because number one, they don't mention how many people are in the CIA in the first place. It's a national secret, so they wouldn't certainly tell if anybody had accepted this. We talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the first executive orders Trump signed was that he needs to get rid of this idea from every part of the government. And certainly some aspects of this, for sure, Muslims are in agreement, but I found a funny story. The NSA has a museum. It's called the National Cryptologic Museum. It's where they showcase how they had different people who cracked codes, and it had an exhibit honoring female and minority alumni. And he said the director of that museum put a paper bag over that. So they were trying to comply with this DEI initiative, so he put a paper bag over this thing, he said, and then suddenly everybody was complaining, why did you put this paper bag over this exhibit? So very small things, but then they also signed, along the same line, there was an executive order that was signed banning transgender athletes from competing in college, high school sports that are under the federal government's purview. And also, which may not have thought about this, it has not been said as explicitly, this would apply to the Olympic Games, because the Olympic Games are coming here in 2028 in Los Angeles. So it's an interesting issue because that is something overlaps with the world in terms of administration about the Olympics. So they said it would deny visas for transgender athletes to visit the US to compete. So it hasn't come up yet, that's 2028, so we'll see. But it's one of those things, if it remains in place, will be another potential source of conflict. I don't think Brother Hisham mentioned this, but he imposed sanctions on the staff of the ICC, some of them who were involved he said, any action against the US and its allies. So of course this made many of the not the superpowers, the African states, some of them came out and said, the US just wants a court that only prosecutes its enemies and not have any other purpose. So obviously this court itself became like a kangaroo court that, and the actual things which the Africans used to complain about is that this court is only for Africans and for nobody else. It became more and more obvious. He resigned from two institutions this week. UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Works Agency, the US resigned from that. Also from the UN Human Rights Council. And in 90 days they said they would see, maybe we'll resign from UNESCO, which is just it's for arts and cultural heritage. It's not that much significance, but again, the interesting part is that the US set up all of these institutions. It's acting as if Russia came around or the Soviet Union or somebody came and imposed these institutions, but these were all US institutions. So it's as if you're setting your own house on fire. And so just another action. You heard Trump say he wants to use Guantanamo Bay to house 30,000 immigrants, up to. Of course, it doesn't have anywhere near that capacity, but this week they did send, I think, 10 detainees were sent to Guantanamo. They were part of this gang, Tren de Aragua. It's a gang that's from Venezuela. And so we'll see how much they expand to, but it definitely doesn't have capacity for 30,000. There was another thing that was in the news about him working with a company that does shipping containers and to create shipping container homes for the detainees. There was a crazy thing where he said he opened up water in California. He said, look at all this beautiful water. Did you hear that? You saw this? So he opened a dam in California, and everybody, even the Army Corps of Engineers, said this is dumb. Why are you doing it? This is no point. But he says this. He was trying to say that the fires in California are caused by this water mismanagement. So of course this water is going 100 miles away from the fire, far away from the fire, and it's going to some place where it's just a dry riverbed. So he said that basically most people who analyzed it said it's going to be just a waste. The water will just evaporate. And the water was actually secured because the farmers need it. The farmers, when in the summer, they need all the water for their crops. So he, in fact, did this dumb thing for no reason anyway, but that was a crazy side thing that happened. He also created an anti-Christian bias task force in the Department of Justice. Many of his supporters, they think there's an anti-Christian bias in the U.S., and they oftentimes at his rallies, they talk about these things. So That was very important to some segment of them, that they create this task force that will look into this kind of bias. He acted on this golf issue. You know, this golf, there's PGA Golf, which is the international golf organization, and then the Saudis made their own called Live Golf, and they offered these golfers, hundreds of millions of dollars. But then they were trying to, recombine again, and so apparently Trump is mediating this effort as well. One thing he definitely has seen from every angle is golf. So he doesn't know much about the Middle East, but golf for sure, he knows it from every angle. I can believe that. He removed climate change. You see from all the websites, there's no, like US government had this throughout the entire government. He removed that. And some members of the NOAA, which is National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, were told to stop working. So there was some issue there as well. One of the biggest things that happened was this Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, right, which is basically Trump put Elon Musk in charge of cutting, basically finding places where there's fraud or abuse, or tried to cut. This is the ostensible purpose of this organization, to cut fraud and abuse and make the government more efficient. And to the point that is it Time magazine where Musk is behind the desk. This is the latest cover, as if he's running the United States. And they asked Trump about it. He was annoyed by the question, but he put him in this position. And some of the things that happened. For example, this is the USAID issue. He is the one who got involved in the USAID. And USAID was originally established by executive order by Kennedy, as Hisham mentioned. But then Congress, through a series of laws in the late 90s and early 2000s, they made it officially a part of the government. So in fact, he doesn't have a statutory authority to just close this agency, but it's supposed to be operating under the State Department. And so one of the, among the Republicans that are a little bit more analytical, they were saying that we want this operation to go back under State Department because it's not as tightly controlled. But nonetheless, he called it a criminal organization, USAID, Musk did, and he said it's time to die, and that he was in the process of shutting down the agency. Who elected this person? He's suddenly shutting down an agency on his own. And they still haven't clarified what he is. He's actually classified as a temporary government employee. He's supposed to work no more than 150 days out of the year, and he has certain requirements. And, some of the people he employed, this was interesting. There was a guy, Marco Illes, and he was one of these 25-year-old. There were 4 or 5 of them that he employed. They were former Twitter employees, and he just got them to work with him to do this job. So this guy resigned. He's 25 years old, Marco Illes, and because the Wall Street Journal showed that he had posted all these racist comments. And so, for example, in July of last year, he said, "Just for the record, I was racist before it was cool." That was what he said in July. In September, he said, "You could not pay me to marry outside of my ethnicity." And then in September, also, he wrote something on Twitter as well, "Normalize Indian hate." And this is an interesting thing he was writing because, after all, the Vice President Vance, he's married to an Indian. The Senate Majority Leader is married to somebody from Chinese descent. And then, of course, we have Tulsi Gabbard, who's originally Indian in the administration. And then we also have this lady from South Carolina, Nikki Haley, is Indian. So, and many of the supporters for Trump were Indians, and they asked him to speak against it. And Vance, who's the vice president, said, "Oh, well, we can't hold it accountable for what kids say. We can't just, I think it was what he said, I don't think stupid social media activity should ruin a kid's life." So he's talking as if he said these things like when he was 18. He just said these like 2 months ago, and he said them over and over again. He never apologized. And Musk then recently said that he's going to bring him back. He said, "To err is human, to forgive is divine." This is what.
One of the statements that this guy have put on Twitter, which really was what hits, he said, "Let Israel and Gaza go to hell. I don't care." That really was more than this Indian issue. But you're right, with the Indian, he hit many officials.
Yeah. So, originally they said that Musk does not have access to what's called, he only has read access. They gave him access to all of the Treasury Department's payment systems. And they said, oh no, he only has read access. But then it was confirmed that they actually had rewritten some of the code. This same guy who was fired. So actually he had access, and a federal court halted that access on Thursday. So they actually was a lawsuit. But in the meantime, one of Musk's very close friends, Tom Krause, was appointed to the Treasury Department as the financial assistant to the secretary. So he put a person even closer who's a full-time employee. So, and of course, nobody knows what kind of access, these people are in charge. They're supposed to have a high-level top security clearance, and none of these people have these things. So it's one of these things where there's going around the law, and it's one of 1,000 things the Democrats are complaining about but don't know what to do anything about. Because basically there's so many violations of the law. I mean, you would fill several pages about all the things that they've done against the law. I mentioned myself, one of the first things they fired all these inspector generals, which they can't do. They're not allowed to. According to Congress, it has to go to Congress, and Congress has to agree. But that was one of the things they did in the first week. So they're just, violating the law right and left. And it was one of these things that even the Democrats to date have not figured out a strategy on how to respond. And Schumer, who is the Senate Minority Leader for Democrats, he said that, many of these Republicans, they agree with us that this guy is doing all kinds of crazy things, and they're going to, he thinks maybe in like 6 months, once the impact of some of the negative things that he's done will come out, that he'll become less popular, and now Republicans will work with us on some of these issues. So we'll see, but that's what Democrats are in a wait-and-see approach. They said, let this guy shoot himself in the foot enough times, as he did, and Schumer mentioned this in the OMB. The Office of Management Budget, he basically, he paused the foreign aid, right? But he also sent a letter pausing all domestic aid as well, like including Medicaid, including food stamps and all sorts of things. It became a crazy thing in the first week, and they had to withdraw the memo after just a couple of days because it was total chaos. And I did speak to one of our brothers here who works in international aid and development. I just, in passing, asked him what's going on. He said, international aid and development, chaos. It's just chaos. As Brother Hisham mentioned, there's 10,000 employees in USAID. Every one of them, many of them have children in schools. They've houses. They're all sorts of things. They told them to come home in 30 days, and so they did get a stay on that. There was a lawsuit, and the judge said that he's going to look at the issue again in February 14th. So there has been some stay, but basically you've destroyed the entire foreign aid apparatus, which is in 100 countries worldwide. As one of the people said that, and she was very explicit, they said, we're not giving this aid out of the goodness of our heart. He said, we're combating tuberculosis in other countries so that tuberculosis doesn't come here. This is the point. We're combating malaria in these other countries so malaria doesn't come here. Because after all it takes is one person from a flight that carries a mosquito from Africa, and suddenly you have Ebola here. And so why not fight it in Africa and not in the United States? And so these are all things, even among the aid that they give, it's all either has a foreign policy objective or a health objective, which is really ultimately for the benefit of the United States. So, destroying these capabilities is really foolhardy. And among them, there's 500,000 tons of food aid that's probably going to waste. This is that's waiting to be delivered. All of these domestic production of wheat and corn, if you make too much, the government buys it from the farmer and then distributes it as international aid. And of course, the reason is they don't want the domestic prices to get out of whack, and they don't want to waste all this, and they can use it for their own foreign policy goals. So if you shut down USAID, suddenly all this tons of food is just waiting in containers, and it's going to go bad, obviously, after a while. And so this is another thing which is definitely going to happen. I think I'll stop it there. I mean, there's a few other things. Immigration is the biggest impact. There's like 10 different things that have happened in immigration. But essentially, one of the biggest changes is that, first of all, making it easy to deport somebody. The Guantanamo Bay we talked about. We also talked about, they eliminated the exemption for ICE, immigration enforcement, to go into churches, schools, and the courtroom. In fact, I saw one, I think it was a local North Carolina, there was two attorneys that were talking about an immigration case in a courthouse, and an ICE undercover agent came to them and told them to stop talking about immigration. It became a big issue, and they took it to the judge inside of the courthouse. But the thing that I took from that is that, how many people who are here undocumented, they still interact with the courthouse because somebody didn't give them their money. They did a project for somebody, they built a walkway for you, and you decide, I'm not going to pay you. Well, where do you take that? To the courthouse. Well, what about the women who are getting beaten by their husbands, domestic violence? It goes to the courthouse. And so if ICE can arrest you in the courthouse, which now they're saying they can do, the lawyer, they interviewed him, he said, we hope they won't do it. It will cause disruption. But now they're clearly there, undercover agents are there, waiting around in the courthouse. And so, you wonder what is the impact going to be on law and order. And especially, we live in a state with large amounts of probably undocumented immigrants who knows what will happen to some of these families and some of these people. Already I've met some people, they complained about they've been cheated by people who, they did a job for them and they said, I'm not going to pay you. And so what can they do? They have no avenue, and even less of an avenue now if they take things to court, because they could be deported in court. So unfortunately, the situation for them is very bad and unlikely to get much better. There is a tax plan that we've started talking about taxes. Trump has mentioned all sorts of tax cuts and very little tax increases. So, so far what he's mentioned, they said it'll add $10 trillion to the deficit in 10 years, so $1 trillion a year. So far that's the plan, that exists, but that is still in the early stages as far as tax activities. I think that we'll end it there and see if we have any questions. I don't want to take the entire time.
Let me just add two quick points. The $3 trillion that they signed this order to freeze the money, he mentioned for Medicaid and for other stuff, but some of it is for university grants and for U.S. Institutions' plans. $3 trillion were frozen. And when there was an outrage on the Republican side, they basically said, the country will not function because $3 trillion is what keeps this economy going, that they have to rescind it and take it back.
You mentioned grants. This week, I didn't mention it because it's kind of a complicated topic. When you get a grant, research grant, like a researcher gets a $1 million grant, the university gets a certain amount extra on top of that. It's called indirect costs. And it's 70% of the grant. Harvard you get $1 million for research, they get $700,000 as indirect cost. He capped the indirect costs this week at 15% or 17%, I think, which every university is complaining about. And will have a huge impact because this is like millions and millions of dollars that go to universities every year to support their research activities. So, we don't know if that will stand. He might have to take it back depending on how much backlash they get. But that was a very important, maybe underreported thing that happened, because it is literally millions of dollars and changing the entire research infrastructure in all the universities in the US.
Yeah, so as a nuclear engineer, I get the letter from the DOE the first week on email saying from now on, you do not need to abide by DEI. I mean, it was a requirement. If any company want to deal with the government, they're saying now, don't. They sent it the first week of the administration. This shows you that even those workers that are, are there, they are in fear of the consequences. And finally, 10,000 immigrants, mostly Afghanis and some Syrians, who already have their visas done, their applications done. They have been kept in Pakistan and Qatar to be vetted, so they are not terrorists to come here. They already have the reservation for them. Trump signed an order from the first day. All the reservations for the 10,000 were canceled. And Pakistan now is asking the Afghans, go back to your home because there's no way to go to the US. So, in a summary, it's chaos, not just in this country, around the world. It touches and may have destroyed the life of many, many people. May Allah bring whatever is khair and good for the ummah. And subhanallah, Allah has His way. Questions, comments? Yes, Abdul Khalid.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you see the Wall Street Journal, opinion op-ed page is not silent. Many of the leading conservatives have, every time there was one of these things that came out, they definitely addressed it. They were against it. But I think the issue is how popular is this president, and so many of the traditional actors are definitely not as strong. And we'll see. I mean, I think what we're going to see is that they're waiting to see this guy will shoot himself in the foot and he will cause himself problems. And that ultimately they are hoping that and I think the Schumer is correct that they have privately told him that they are waiting for this initial wave to subside, and suddenly many of his actions, which are dumb and going to cause a lot of harm, will have natural consequences that then they can act on. So,
also remember, in March, the Congress and the Senate would need to come up with a budget and to spend the money. That's what the Democrats are counting on, because at that point, they are needed, because the Republican cannot push the money part without them. So that's what they're counting. As far as American being weakened, definitely. I mean, that's why it's really something to think about, that who is benefiting from this other than Russia and China in this regard. And, those guys, I mean, look at the Secretary of Defense. They are talking about cutting the budget and we need to cut money. He submitted a bill to paint his house for $49,000. And they say, wait a minute. I mean, I thought we want to save money. $49,000 for just a painting job in this regard. So hypocrisy is clear in that regard at different levels. Remain to be seen where this thing would lead. One final comment or question. Yes, Sahih. Good question. You're right. He said during the campaign, it will take me 1 day to end the war. Of course, part of what he have done that I forget to mention, and Sheikh Hassan has mentioned, is cutting foreign aid. The main one that will be affected by that is Ukraine. So he cut foreign aid except for Egypt and the Zionist entity in Palestine. So this is a step, because who's gonna be paying for that? Now he says Easter. By Easter, the war will finish. And I'm not sure what's, again, by the way, nobody knows what's in his mind except him. I mean, if somebody says, I know what's in his mind, forget it. So he will come with some of these things. And again, I think this is also something that have to do with this macho thing that, I am the president, I am strong. Biden is weak. I mean, imagine he removed from Biden the right to see classified material. I mean, how crazy is this with other officials? So with Ukraine, he's not talking about it, because basically if he talks about it, he will get embarrassed because he did not achieve it. So Easter is the date, inshallah. Mark your calendar, inshallah. Jazakum Allah khair wa barakallahu feekum. Allah subhanahu bring the khair and the good for the ummah and save the world from what is happening in this country. Jazakum Allah khair.